Hello, my name is John Campion and I'm the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner, and welcome to the latest edition of the Safer West Mercia podcast. I'm joined today by a special guest from West Mercia Police who I'll allow to introduce themselves.
Good morning, John. My name is Graham Donaldson. I'm the Rural and Business Crime Officer for the Shropshire LPA part of West Mercia Police.
So, Graham, you're not new to West Mercia Police or policing. You've been in and around both of those for a while. What did you do before your current role?
I am a fully fledged 30-year retiree. So I was in the police service for a full 30-year term. 15 years of that was spent in the Metropolitan Police, working in a city environment, so the complete polar opposite of West Mercia. And 2003, I transferred for family reasons and quality of life reasons, really, into West Mercia Police, where I was a response officer at many stations: Bridgnorth, Madeley, Wellington and Telford, until the date of the final retirement, 2019.
And you now work for the community as a rural and business crime officer. Sounds a very fancy title, Graham. Some of the listeners might not know what it does. Just explain a little bit about what your role entails and maybe what a typical day is, if such a thing exists.
I'm one of 5 rural and business crime officers based across West Mercia, with colleagues based in the other policing areas of North and South Worcestershire, Herefordshire and Telford and Wrekin. Primarily, our primary function really is to help deliver the police contribution towards rural crime objectives, which have been set by yourself, haven't they, John? So basically reducing harm, maintaining effective community engagement and targeting those who cause harm. We do that with working with partners. Those partners include other rural crime coordinators, police officers and staff, volunteers, and most importantly, communities. As far as the standard day goes, like many other officers, I'll come in on first thing on the morning and see what's gone on the previous day. I try and deal with victims of crime as much as I can. So there is a misconception, I believe, amongst communities that police don't take rural crime seriously. And I would take issue with that. I think in the past, we haven't been the best at visiting victims of crime when it comes to rural crime, because the focus has always tended to be, quite rightly, on sort of domestic abuse and road traffic collisions and residential burglaries. What I try and do is to bridge that gap between the police and the community, whereas I will visit victims of crime, no matter how minor, as could argue there's no such thing as a minor crime, but some people will say that, it's just a break into a shed, why bother getting involved with it? But I will try and get involved, visit on a daily basis. In addition to visiting victims of crime, we will do crime prevention visits. So if we've got a particular member of the rural community who was concerned about crime in the neighbourhood, we will visit, we'll do a site review and recommend any sort of security products, with the intention just to offer that support, reassurance and crime prevention advice to rural communities as best we can.
So a really varied and busy role, and your experience before in the big smoke, and then more latterly up here in the rural shires as a police officer. What made you want to do it? What made you want to, post your holding the warrant of a police officer, want to do this? Why was it a natural step?
Well, really, the last 5 years of my police service were spent policing rural communities in Shropshire. It was something I always enjoyed. I've always enjoyed being out and about, if you like, that side of policing. I've never been one of the police officers I've never had an office job. So in my 30 years policing career, it was always on response policing and a little bit of traffic policing on the motorways. So the job, when it come up for me, it just seemed to fit my personal circumstances at the time. And it's all about, for me, just being out there in the community. I'm not one for flying a desk, to coin a phrase. I'd gained a lot of experience with working with rural communities and businesses as a response officer. And I just saw that as a way of carrying that on. I did looking at a career outside of the police service, but I just thought I'd like to carry on the skills that I'd learned over 30 years. It just seemed a shame to waste them, really. I've always enjoyed engaging with members of the public, and really that's the primary reason I took the job, was just to continue that engagement.
In terms of your very credible operational experience, and then coming to this role, is there something you'd reflect on in those couple of years since doing this role that you'd say that's why this is worthwhile? This is something I'm really proud of. This is the purpose as to why we're here.
Yeah, I think one of the main things which I didn't realise when I was a response police, because response police officers they're really busy, so you would turn up to see a victim of a crime or an incident, and you wouldn't really get that much time to spend with the victims or with witnesses before you had to shoot off and do another job. Since doing this job, I've realised the importance of spending more time with victims of crime and more time with members of the public. And I think we were getting to a stage where we were being accused of losing that. Now, I did see something I wasn't really aware of, was a lack of confidence, really, in the policing service amongst rural communities, with that perceived view that police didn't take rural crime seriously. And I took that on board, and it upset me a little bit that people held those views. It was a view that I wasn't aware of, and really, as police officers, we should have been aware of it. So that's something I'm sort of quite passionate about, is increasing that confidence. And the way we try and do that as police and as rural and business officers, I think we needed to be more visible to communities, and something, just paying community visits. I like to do cold calling, for instance, whereby if I'm out and about in a vehicle, just popping into a farm and engaging with them for 5 or 10 minutes, even if they haven't been a victim of a crime. They see somebody from the police, having effective engagement with them, and building up those lines of communication. And for me, that's my primary objective at the moment, and I think we're doing a good job of that.
Building that relationship, I think is really important, because it's not in that moment of where that pop in. It's when they do need you, in terms of the confidence, and it's not just you in terms of you as an individual, you as in West Mercia Police, that service. And I think that's where the consent and the confident in, I think, is really important. And that's why, I'm a big fan of the work that your team do, and that ability, as you said earlier, to spend longer with people, to give that meaningful interaction. I think is really important. Building the confidence in the public in terms of the laws being upheld, to me, is really important as Commissioner. And one of the areas around wildlife crime, often wildlife crime seen as a victimless type crime. It's only an animal, which isn't a view I would share. And wildlife crime is a terrible and very harmful crime, and it is in our communities in West Mercia. What would you say to those communities to balance out those that think that West Mercia Police don't take things like wildlife crime seriously?
I think perhaps we haven't been good at explaining this in the past, John. I think wildlife crimes, they're notoriously difficult offences to prove at the best of times. We have got a lot better within West Mercia Police. And again, if I put my police officer's hat back on, thinking back to incidents that I used to deal with, it was very, very difficult to get a trained wildlife crime officer within West Mercia Police. To put that into some sort of context, we've done really well over the last couple of years. With an increase in funding, we've been able, and I am going to read a few stats, so hopefully people don't get too bored with that. I won't dwell on it too long. For instance, 2 years ago, there were only 6 fully trained wildlife crime officers within West Mercia Police. There are now 38 members of staff. So in a 2-year period, we've gone from 6 to 38 members of staff who are trained in wildlife crime issues.
Wow, that's massive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a massive uplift. And the good thing about wildlife crime officers is that they've all volunteered to do the course. It's not a course that they've been sent on. So every person and member of staff who were trained, they requested the training. It's carried out by a diverse group of officers, from police community support officers to safer neighbourhood teams and response officers. And we even have one of our senior crime officers who's fully trained as a wildlife crime officer. With a lot of officers, unfortunately, it's a part-time basis, and they have to build it in with other, regular duties. So response officers, they will still have to do the day-to-day policing, answer 999 calls, but they are there for other officers who haven't trained to act as that point of reference. So at the moment, a wildlife crime officer is more likely to act in an advisory capacity, which tends to mean that a response officer will respond to a call from a member of the public and then ask a wildlife crime officer for advice on it and then to take on any subsequent investigation. When calls come in from members of the public, they are thankfully now classified as a wildlife crime incident, and a wildlife crime officer will be sent an email so that allegation from primarily a member of the public, but it could be from RSPCA or RSPCP, and force-wide, every wildlife crime officer gets informed of that particular incident. And then it's obviously broken down to a policing area. So if something happened in Shropshire, the 8 wildlife crime officers we got in Shropshire, they will all be informed of this particular incident. And between ourselves, we will decide on who gets to deal with it. Works really well. The reports are assessed. The wildlife crime officer will take the opportunity to obtain any valuable evidence at an early stage, and this will help us to instigate a prompt and effective investigation as best we can.
In terms of, for me, unpacking the amazing stats of going from such a small number to a great, that's about ensuring that those everyday police officers or those working in policing have somebody to go to who's got a bit of expertise, ensuring that spread of the knowledge is that concierge into a very specialist bit of work, and increasing the chances that we can use that specialist knowledge to bring the offenders to justice and safeguard parts of our environment. Really important. For me, I think your role is a fascinating one, because it isn't just about when it's happened and the service afterwards, which I've heard you talk about, and it's good to hear the quality there, but also that preventing in the first place. And to hear some of that, for me, is really impactful. You do what you do, Graham, and you were a police officer previously. If you did what I did for a day, if you were PCC for a day, what would be the first thing that you would do? What would be your first priority?
Oh, that's a lot of responsibility on some shoulders, John. Where would I go? Where would I go with this? Right. I think, difficult, John. I'm just trying to think. You caught me off guard. From a personal point of view, if I take away the sort of policing aspect of it, put my personal hat on, I think there is more we could be doing when it comes to the wildlife crime side of things. I would probably look at having as I've mentioned before, the wildlife crime officers have still got that sort of day-to-day responsibility. I'd certainly consider look at having what I would call a rural crime team with a bigger sort of responsibility for that wildlife crime, rather than sometimes we rely on, you might have an officer who has a responsibility for dealing with a domestic incident, and then we're asking them to deal with a wildlife crime. I think if we had a team, and I do understand the operational implications of it, to deal with nothing but rural crime and wildlife crime, if I'm honest.
And there's no wrong answer to that question. It's always fascinating the different take that people have on it, and what I can do in my role. But my commitment's clear. It was in my last police and crime plan. It's in this police and crime plan, ensuring all of our communities, whether they be rural, urban, are safe and be kept safe. is really important. And I recognise, and I've heard clearly and loudly from the public in some of our more rural communities, that they don't always feel that they are well served in terms of response or indeed the proactivity. And it's really great to hear some of your work and your colleagues' work about trying to balance that out across the huge patches that we have here in West Mercia, our beautiful countryside. Graham, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and for talking about some of the work that you do.
Oh, no, it's okay. More than happy. Thank you.
And I'm very grateful for those listening to today's podcast. You can find out more around my work tackling crime in our rural communities across West Mercia on the West Mercia PCC website. If you pop that into your search engine, all the details should come up. And I'd like to thank those listeners today to this latest edition of the Safer West Mercia podcast.